2016 begins with events in England with the British investigation into the Litvinenko death. The judge announced the results of those investigations on January 6th, and his position was, and the position of the British government was that this uh, use of plutonium 210 had to have been sanctioned at the highest levels in Russia, that this radioactive material was kept under strict guard and could not have been smuggled out unless uh, top officials had given orders. So linking this essentially back to the Kremlin. Of course, the Russians denied this and they called this all a hoax and said that he died of natural causes or he was poisoned by the British Secret Service. But this became a controversy in Russian-British relations. In February, the Russian involvement in the civil war in Syria got deeper with the very intensive Russian bombardment of the city of Aleppo and thousands of people being killed as a result of that bombing campaign. Um, on March 2nd, as a result of Crimea and Ukraine, as I think also the Litvinenko death and the Russian um, brutal support for the Assad regime, all these factors led the EU to put a number of sanctions on people close to um, Vladimir Putin, hitting a number of the top Russian leaders. On March 14th, the Russians announced, surprisingly, their withdrawal from Syria. And of course, this withdrawal is still in effect. It's somewhat like the American withdrawal from Afghanistan. Well, you might live to see the American withdrawal complete. I'm not sure I will. All right, moving on then on the chart, the sheet that I've given you on 2016. Um, we Putin addresses this question of the Panama Papers. Now, I haven't really talked about the Panama Papers. Myers does a good deal of talking about that. This was a combined campaign by a group of independent investigative journalists that most of this material has been published in Germany, but it's all in English. You can read it. Just Google Panama Papers, you'll get that. What happened is someone leaked thousands and thousands of pages of documents on a flash drive to these investigative reporters. The information came from a law firm in Panama that operated as a conduit for wealthy oligarchs, wealthy criminals to launder their money through banks and corporations and offshore accounts through Panama. Panama is one of those places like we talked about the Cayman Islands where um, they have high secrecy laws that protect many of these people who have stolen money from their country and from their people, and want to ensure that in case of a political revolution in their country, they're not going to lose that money. They park it in these offshore accounts. And this law firm in Panama was notorious for that. What this addresses is while they've never been able to show that Putin himself has a personal fortune, all of the people around him, people that what I call Putin's cronies. I'm not the first one to call them that. These people, and I will be sending you out an overhead that will list some of these people and their relationship to Putin, and refer you to an interesting article where there's a chart that shows all these linkages. The These Panama Papers show so many people who are close to Putin. Um, Rothenberg, Timoshenko, and others that are going to be on that chart that have these enormous fortunes. And certainly Myers talks a great deal about that going into suit the construction of the facilities of Sochi for the Olympics, etc. Um, And then there's the famous or infamous cellist Sergei Roganov. Rogan is a good cellist, probably not in the level of Yo-Yo Ma, but he's famous, and yet he's a multimillionaire, multi-billionaire. Let us put it like that. And what the reporters imply is that this cellist is holding money that really belongs to Putin. You can't find an account in Putin's name, but all of these people who have known him since his days back in St. Petersburg have now become billionaires. And access to these no bid contracts that the Russian government gives out, um, all of these people have high positions in major corporations that have grown very rapidly and very much because of their close ties to the Russian government. And so this leads to the argument of that Putin is one of the wealthiest people in the world, although most of that wealth is held by his close personal friends. Um, and they know if he needs, when he wants to go on a vacation, or one of these, some of these wealthy people help build or fund the presidential yacht, this big, enormous, beautiful yacht that's in the Black Sea. This is how he has held his fortune. And this is also in keeping with the work that Boris Nemtsov did. Um, and that's discussed in the Myers book too, and some of his colleagues, um, where they started issuing several extensive reports about the linkage between Putin and Medvedev and the people around them, and the fortunes, the vast fortunes that these people were able to build because of their linkage with the two presidents, Medvedev and then Putin again. All right, April 5th, 2016, Putin announces the creation of a new military force, a National Guard. Um, and this is a force that is placed under the control of one of his friends from the KGB, a guy named General Zolotov. And he um, has close ties with him. He was actually in charge of Putin's presidential security service, and very loyal to Putin. What we think is Putin was looking for a way to bring even more support and security to his position as president. And so this is an organization that is completely dependent upon the president. The general reports directly to the president. So this is his own military force, another um, power ministry, if you will, that's been added. Force agencies, another term. This is the National Guard. They called this force together from elements of the National Guard and the old Presidential Security Service. But this is a group that is supposedly now loyal to him. And a lot of reporters and Soviet, Russian scholars have thought that this is a protection, a closer protection, completely under the control of the president, people that are going to be loyal to him. Given the fears of what was happening in Syria and the results of Arab Spring, the overthrow of the government in Egypt and then in Libya, so that this is a part of Putin protecting himself for the future. All right, then we have to discuss another one of these particular call-in shows. Putin loves to, once or twice a year, hold these events where he answers questions from the people of Russia. Of course, these questions that they phone in, they have been previously screened. There are camera occasionally when they broadcast somebody asking the question. That's all been prearranged. But it's good theater, and the Russian people love it, and it gives us a chance to hear directly from him on events in Russia. Although this time in 2016, he spends a lot of time talking about international relations and the United States' imperial ambitions and how Russia must be treated as an equal partner. Um, He says intermarriage, there has to be cooperation. So he's again arguing that the United States has been ignoring Russia's interest, and he has to stand up. So he's projecting this image of the strong leader, a strong, secure leader. That's followed at the end of April by an action taken by the new government in Crimea, but under the support of Yeltsin and the Russian Federation, to ban the Crimean Tatar Assembly. Now, the Crimean Tatars are the remnants of the old Golden Horde, that the Mongol yoke, and they've lived in the Crimea since the 15th century. And they are a substantial minority in the Crimea. Stalin, during the Great Patriotic War, perceived this group as a potential threat, and they were rounded up, put on boxcars, and sent into Central Asia, and dumped in the middle of nowhere and had to fend for themselves, just the way hundreds of thousands of Chechens were dumped in this wasteland of Central Asia. And hence the opposition in Chechnya. A lot of it goes back to people whose grandfathers and fathers, mothers, suffered through this exile of the Great Patriotic War. So that the predominant group in Chechnya, I've said, in Crimea, are Russian speakers, but the Crimean Tatars are a distinct minority. They've had their own little assembly that can express their views. It's kind of like a civil society for these Crimean Tatars. But they have been critical of the occupation. They've been critical of the annexation of Crimea by Russia, and they are constantly raising criticism in the assembly. So what do? You just close the assembly, you ban it, and deny them that access for complaints and any possible opposition to the central regime. In July, we have another instance of a governor being arrested for corruption, um, supposedly accepting bribes. There was an investigation. Police found a suitcase in a Moscow residence that he supposedly owned that had millions of dollars stashed away in the suitcase. And this, again, is Putin reasserting himself, reminding the governors who's in charge, because all of them have had their hands out. They all could be accused of bribery and corruption, but it's a pick and choose. And the dictator, the autocrat, better word, has to show he's in charge, and that anyone can be pulled down at any moment. Uh, August 8th, he appoints a new chief of staff, and this is an interesting development because apparently his chief of staff and longtime friend Sergei Ivanov was grumbling about a number of the developments, things that were happening, and not completely feeling that he was being appreciated and involved. And apparently it got got on Putin's nerves, and he decided to demote Ivanov and bring in this new fellow, Vanio. And who the hell is Vanio? Well, turns out Vanio is this young technocrat with a reputation for being an effective manager, little political ambition, and he gets promoted overnight because Putin, he is somebody that Putin can manipulate and control, and he's not going to make waves because he doesn't have any political strength of his own. All right. So we now need to talk about the Duma elections, and I did send you a chart that gives the votes for the various parties, and you'll see when you look at that chart, again, United Russia dominant. They now control the Duma, 343 seats in the Duma. Now, this election, you'll see, also has the constituency or the single member districts added to the proportional representation. Remember, this has changed. This is how the Constitution of '93 was originally set up, and then uh, Putin pushed through an amendment to the Constitution to eliminate the single member districts or the constituencies. And then, as a result of the opposition, the demonstrations that came out regarding the last Duma election, 2011, they made changes and then reintroduced the constituencies. And you can see that very few members of these smaller parties get elected by the constituency. Most of them have to get elected um, by the proportional representation. The threshold, remember now, is 7%. So that there are only 4 parties that have representation: United Russia, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia, which is not liberal or democratic, that's the Zhirinovsky Party, and this party, a Just Russia. This is another party that was created by the Kremlin. It used to be called the Right Cause. Now it's called Just Russia. It was created specifically to draw support from the nationalist and the communist, but to demonstrate that this is still supposedly a, quote, open political system that allows all these parties to participate. You'll scroll down, you'll see there is another communist party. There are several communist parties now in Russia. Yabloko, which is a truly democratic, liberal democratic party, um, can only get less than 2% of the vote and has no representation at all in the new Duma, neither by, since it didn't make the 7% to get part of the proportional vote, the proportional representation, and it doesn't have um, any constituencies elected. On the other page, you'll see some other parties that have very limited involvement. Um, and so this is a new parliament that is completely controlled by United Russia, and that is absolutely in support 100% of Putin. There was very low turnout of this campaign. Less than 50% of the people voted. Um, and in the cities, the turnout was even far less than the 50%. In the 20s and 30s% in some of the cities. All right. So Putin, we're looking forward to the next presidential election coming up 2018, and the Duma is solidly behind United Russia. The campaign against corruption that Putin has always been talking about really strikes again home when the economic development minister is arrested for corruption and accused of accepting a bribe of $2 million to help in the privatization of certain state entities that haven't been privatized yet. Um, Again, this is Putin sending a message to all of the circles around him that he is the one who makes the final decisions. November 22nd, Alexei Navalny. Now remember, he has been the thorn on the side of United Russia and the thorn on the side of Putin. He's been complaining about the party of crooks and thieves and swindlers. He announces he's going to run for the president, and yet he has been convicted of fraud. However, the European Court of Human Rights said that this conviction for fraud should be thrown out, that it was government manipulated, and he's announcing he's going to run for president 2018. Who else is going to run for president 2018? The last event I have here is another one of these great military disasters, a plane crashing into the Black Sea. Also in December, they arrested a police colonel in Moscow for apparently accepting $1.4 million in hard currency cash for a bribe. And so the campaign against corruption is supposedly raging, but as I've said before, you see that the people around Putin are the ones who are most benefiting from the. They have become the new oligarchs, and Myers does a great job of discussing that, as well as the overhead I'm going to be sending you about Putin's cronies. Let's move on to 2017, where the Duma passes a law that is very disturbing, and it's indicative of the increasing conservative nature of the rule of Putin. This is almost a return to the patriarchy, that the father is the man is the dominant figure in a marriage. And it says that the vote was to decriminalize wife beating. And then they adopt a change when that vote protest. They said the law will go into effect um, if you beat your wife, and if she is hospitalized as a result of that beating, then you can be arrested for the crime of brutalization of your wife, but only if the wife is placed in a hospital. Again, in February, the Russians talk about how the Russian government is saying that Navalny can't run because he's an extremist. He doesn't have a party behind him. Lots of reasons are put forward, but again, Navalny says he is going to run, that the people around him will gain enough uh, signatures on petitions that he will run for the presidency. In March, despite the crackdown of the regime on some of the corrupt officials, there's thousands of people come out for the continual day-to-day little corruptions that people have to live with in Russia, having to bribe the teachers at school, having to bribe to get into schools that should be open, bribing doctors. Any service you want, you have to take something small and give that person providing it. And this is so frustrating to so many of the Russians, particularly those in the cities. The Ministry of Education also in March decides to go back on rescind a ruling that they made that the European University in St. Petersburg uh, should be closed. Now, this is a university that has a lot of Western European support, and it was created after the collapse of the Soviet Union to try to introduce to the post-Soviet Russia the best of Western European educational system. So this is a very prestigious university, but it has a lot of people who have been very critical of the Putin regime and critical of this increasing authoritarianism of the regime. So the ministry uh, announced towards the end of 2016 that they were going to take away its charter. That provoked a lot of response in Western Europe, saying, this is a very valid, legitimate, prestigious institution. And so uh, late in March, the government Ministry of Education decided that, okay, we are going to rescind this, and we are going to give them their record, their license to operate, continue. April 3rd, still reminding of the fact that the war in Chechnya, while supposedly over, the dissent lingers. A bomb goes off in the St. Petersburg metro. Now, it turns out that the person who planted the bomb was not a Chechen, but a Kyrgyz from Kyrgyzstan. But he was Muslim. He felt that his religion was being attacked by the Russian government, and he wanted to strike out against it. However, a couple days later, the Chechen security forces again launched another campaign directed at gays and lesbians in Chechnya. On one hand, the regime in Chechnya says homosexuals don't exist in Chechnya, and on the other hand, then they go after gays and lesbians, and they keep using what the Russian government will combat, that they are trying to recruit children. All the researchers, we know that there's no relationship between pedophilia and lesbian and gays. Most pedophiles, almost all pedophiles, tend to be heterosexuals. So, but this is part of this crackdown, trying to bring back the old days and the old ways. And remember, the leader in Chechnya Kadyrov can pretty much do whatever he wants there, as long as he turns out the vote for Putin and he keeps the Chechen resistance under his thumb. All right. May 4th, more protests in Moscow, this time not directly at the regime, but at some of the people around the Kremlin leadership because of controversy over urban renewal. The regime has been pushing to tear down a lot of the old apartment buildings so that they can build new modern high rises. People who are living in these buildings for years are opposed to that. The argument is that when you tear down these buildings and you move middle or lower class people out, you bring in developers who build these big fancy high rises, and who can afford the rent of these big fancy high rises or the mortgages? Only wealthy Russians, the new Russians. And so you got a lot of people coming out on the street. However, while these protests look bad for Putin, these are not Putin's people. These aren't the people who are going to be voting for Putin and United Russia in Moscow. All right. Uh, the protest leaders are attacked by some people loyal to Putin. There's this habit of throwing green dye on them so they can be singled out by the police and then arrested. And a lot of controversy going on, a lot of unrest, but this is small scale protests, right? In June, now, surprise, shockingly, we have the arrest supposedly of the killers of Boris Nemtsov. Oh, the people around Nemtsov, his family, say that this is a put up job. These are people who are taking the fall for the actual killers. And who are they but Chechens? And the relationship between the government of Chechnya and the Russian Federation is so tight. How is this that people who had served in the Chechen security forces are arrested and convicted for killing a critic of Putin? How could this happen if the president of the Chechen Republic, Kadyrov, wasn't somehow involved? And if he was involved, then was this sanctioned by the Kremlin? So all these rumors circulate around the killing of Nemtsov. All right, July, and the REP stands for the Republicans. This is in the United States. Republican leaders have been pushing uh, Trump for more sanctions to be put on Russia because there is this split, whereas the President of the United States seems to think that the Russians haven't interfered in the elections and are within their rights, I guess, to interfere in Syria and the Crimea and Ukraine. But some of the Republicans, because of their voters, are taking a very different view of that, putting pressure on President Trump. In October, you have this woman, Sensia Sobchak, who declares she's going to run for president. Sobchak, remember that name? Putin's old mentor, the first democratically elected mayor of St. Petersburg. This is his daughter, and she's become something of a television celebrity. She's on a lot of interview shows, often a guest on other programs. Um, she's probably, if she's a critic of Putin, she's a critic light. And she says that she's going to run as the representative of this growing protest movement against uh, Putin. But she's thought to be pretty flighty, attractive but flighty, and not a real substantial character. Um, some people have argued that even Putin encouraged her to run as a way to draw support from some of his other opposition and to show how open and democratic the campaign for presidency will be, while they are at the same time trying to deny the most popular opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, an opportunity to be on the ballot. All right. Then November 14th, this organization, Russia Today, that has a magazine and website and newspaper that is forced by the United States to register as a foreign agent. They have been claiming that they're an independent news organization presenting a different side of the Russian view to the American people. Um, but this this is really a lie. This is and again they talk about this in the Gensa book, how Russia today is an arm of the Russian government. And here it is turnabout. The American government is saying you've got to register as an agent of a foreign power. Um, Also, towards the end of November, I didn't put this on the chart, but the Russian Supreme Court upholds a ban on Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia because have been labeled an extremist organization. Now, if you've ever been home and had somebody knock on your door having these Jehovah's Witnesses come and want to pass out literature, it can be irritating. But to label them an extremist is as a result of this increasing tie between the Putin administration and the Russian Orthodox Church, this increasing conservatism that any of these Western-oriented religions that start in the West are trying to be banned. Trying to rush through this because I'm at 31 minutes now. A Crimean Tartar activist dies as a result of police raid because the police are cracking down on the Crimean Tartars in Crimea. November 25th, uh, Putin signs an act that extends the law that was directed at non-governmental organizations that accept Western aid, Western help, have to register as foreign agents. Now that's being extended to the media, that if you start publishing articles that appear in the West, you can be required to register as an agent of a foreign power. Uh, Also, December 5th, Russia, as a result of the doping scandals, has been banned from the 2018 Olympics that will take place in Korea. And Putin's response is that doesn't matter. It's the medal count that's important. So depending on how many medals we get, the Russians will be happy if they have they're still be competing. And then the year ends with Putin announcing that he is going to run. Surprise, surprise. He's going to run in 2018 again. All right, for a 6-year term. All right, I'm going to stop there, so hopefully we'll be able to get this uploaded. That is 2017.